In this video, we're going to be talking about analyzing influences. This is a unit that we covered in 6th grade, so much of it is going to sound familiar. During this unit, we're going to practice analyzing influences by talking about body image and body confidence. And in particular, we're going to be looking at the media influence on these things. Analyzing influences. Just so we're all on the same page, the term influence means to have the ability to affect the character, behavior, or actions of another person that would influence you. The term analyzing influences is the ability to identify how messages and information can have an effect on an outcome. Doesn't matter what the outcome is. Last year we were talking about your interests and your hobbies and how those were influenced by other people. This year we're going to think about the outcome as your body image. We'll be talking about that term much more later on in class. But for now, in this particular video, our focus is just going to be on analyzing influences in general. This does allow us to recognize how our background and the world around us affect our ability to make choices and behave so that we can make even better choices. The overall goal of analyzing influences is for you to be able to use that skill to make better choices and understand why you're doing or not doing things in your life. Last year, we focused on how family, peers, and culture impact our actions, choices, and our health. This year, we'll be focusing on the influence that media can have. And as I mentioned in the last slide, our biggest focus is going to be on how it affects our body image. So what is media? Well, media includes all the ways that information, ideas, stories, etc. are shared between people, with the exception of face-to-face conversations. We wouldn't really call face-to-face conversations media. This particular video that you're watching right now would be considered a form of media. I'm using this video to share information, ideas, and stories with you. If we think about different types of media, media could include things like social networking platforms or other social networking tools. It can include video games, magazines, radio, billboards, newspapers, movies, TV, including the apps that you view on TV, and books. All of these would be considered forms of media. Now, with that being said, media can often be confusing. And there's a few reasons for that. Because there's so many different forms of media, we end up getting these ideas and thoughts from all of these different people and different sources coming at us all at the same time, sometimes about the same exact thing. So let's say, for example, that there is a current law that voters need to vote on. While they're trying to make that decision, they are going to see the comments of various people on social media. They're going to see people saying why it's so important that they vote yes to enact this law. And they're going to hear people saying, no, enacting this law would be the worst thing possible. We saw this in Massachusetts with question 1 in our most recent election, which would have limited the number of patients that a nurse could see during the course of a shift or at any one time. And you might remember hearing this idea that nurses say vote yes, but also nurses say vote no. That creates a lot of confusion when we see social media messages that conflict. Now we add into it the radio. So let's say with this particular law that we're talking about, you aren't really sure. People on social media are saying vote yes, people on social media are saying no. You're listening to the radio and you're listening to the news and they're talking about why you should be saying yes. You flip to another channel and you have a commercial on the radio telling you why you should vote no. To make this even worse, on your way to work, you drive by a billboard that's telling you what you're supposed to think. Of course, media is confusing. We often think that media is an unbiased form of communication. This is especially true with news. We think when we put on the TV news, we can believe what is being said as fact. The problem is that a lot of news is fact with people's opinions around it. So they only share the parts that they want to share. They only share what they think will happen as opposed to another group's thoughts or ideas. So when we're going through analyzing influences, we have a few skill cues. The first skill cue is to identify the influence. This is the easiest part of this step. So, for example, in identifying the influence, you'd identify TV as an influence on you, or a video game. In our case, since we're focused on media. Next, we analyze the influence. This is a little bit harder, but this is something we'll be spending a lot of time on in class, going through the steps to analyze the influence. This includes things like, how do I know it's influencing? You're going to ask yourself this question. What messages am I receiving from this influence? So, for example, your family might be influencing you around homework completion. What message are you receiving from this influence? That homework is important and you need to do all of it every night. Is this a positive or negative influence? Here in class, our focus is going to be on our health. So we're going to be thinking about whether this positively or negatively influences your health. By having something like our health to frame it, it's a little bit easier to decide if it's positive or negative. How much is this influencing your thoughts, actions, and beliefs? Is it just a small influence that's easy to ignore, or is this something that is big and in your face, telling you to think, act, and believe what you're being influenced to do? Our next step after we've analyzed the influence is to examine how other factors might be interacting with this influence. So, for example, again, in class, our focus this unit will be on media. But during this step of the skill cues is when you might think about how your family or your peers or your culture are also influencing you. Next, we consider what you need to do about this influence or what actions you should take. For example, if it's a form of media, you've been watching a TV show lately that's really been influencing the way that you think about yourself, and you've determined that it's a negative influence. One of the things that you might consider doing is no longer watching that show. You might identify that it's a negative influence. You've probably had this happen to you with an adult in your life who decided that something was a negative influence on you, and as a result, you should no longer be around it. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's not so easy. For example, if you have a classmate who's a negative influence on you, you might not necessarily be able to avoid them altogether. So maybe the action that you need to take is to let them know that you don't want to do the things they're trying to talk you into doing.